All right, good evening and welcome to the Torah Studies, Parshas Vaeira. And in this week's Parsha, we begin already to read about the redemption, the redemption from Egypt, talking about the plagues that are coming upon the Egyptians. And we're almost ready to come out of Egypt. And the topic of discussion today is connected with the plagues that the Egyptians were plagued. It is connected also with the mitzvah of the mitzvah we were commanded during Passover, which is mainly, of course, not to eat the chametz, not to have chametz in the house. And the topic is the elusive fifth element, going the extra mile makes all the difference. What do we mean by that? We have a fifth element of how we relate in our relationship with Hashem. I'm going to use an example of using in a service in a restaurant. When you come to a restaurant, you expect what? You expect good food, delicious food. You expect friendly staff, good service. There is also sometimes in a restaurant that they go the extra mile. They do beyond what is required in order to make you happy. And this example we're going to be using later to give us, we'll use it to understand better what we're talking about. So back to the mitzvah and Passover, that we're not allowed to have chametz. Any unleavened bread is forbidden. You cannot have any unleavened bread. And this prohibition on Passover is different than many other prohibitions. You know, there's a lot of things that you're not allowed to eat. You cannot eat shrimp. You cannot eat other things. Milk and meat. There's many different things you cannot eat. But the chametz, it says not only you cannot eat the chametz, but you cannot enjoy it, you cannot benefit from it, you cannot even possess it. And the question is why? Why is the mitzvah, the prohibition about chametz, so severe that you cannot not only to eat it, but also not to enjoy it and not to even possess it? Now, to answer this question, we need to go a little deep below the surface to talk about the four elements. I would say just talk about the four elements that the world is made of. Everything in the world is made out of four elements. You have the Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Afa, the fire, the air, the water, and earth. So let's see inside. All right. Just want to make sure we get it all in. Okay. So here's the question. Why must chametz be destroyed before Passover? What distinguishes this prohibition from other prohibition in Jewish life that we are not required to destroy? That's the only prohibition that we are required to destroy. All right. So here we're talking about the four elements. About gufim lalu. This is forgive me. So there are four bodies: fire, wind, water, and earth are the fundamental elements of all that was created under the sky. This comes from the Maimonides. The body of everything that exists, be it human, beasts, fowl, crawling creatures, fish, plant, metal, precious stones, pearl, building stones, mountains, a lump of earth, is a combination of these four fundamental elements. Now, before we unpack this reading, we have to address the elephant in the room. I know that I'm not a scientist, I'm far from it, but today's science talk about many different other elements, basic elements, but that's not what we're talking about over here. Like, there's 118 elements in the periodic table. And so this actually, there is someone once asked the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Rebbe did have background in science also. And someone asked the Rebbe about this question: what does it mean, the elements that our sages talk about, the four elements? So the Rebbe spoke about it. It's in contrast to the modern periodic table with 118 elements. Maimonides only lists four. Is Maimonides' teaching still relevant today if it doesn't align with modern scientific discoveries? So obviously the Rebbe says that Maimonides is talking about a different thing. And this is what the Rebbe is saying here. Here says the Rebbe, the elements that our sages addressed here are not foundational in the sense of being indestructible and indivisible. They are foundational in the sense that everything that exists is comprised of them. They are also irrelevant to the chemical elements. There are those who understand these elements as characteristics such as cold, wet, hot, and dry, etc. This is why our sages call them characteristic of nature, as it says in the Medrash. Okay. Now, when we talk about these four elements, the four elements that we have, that we speak about, they are what basically that everything in the world, it contains. We're not talking about the one, talking about fire, air, and we're talking about the element of fire. It's not physical fire. And every item, every object, everything in the world contains, and it's made up of all those four elements. Now, this is what the elements, these four elements we speak about throughout history. However, there's also a fifth element. What is the fifth element? The fifth element is a generic element, meaning you have the elements, the four elements of air, fire, and earth and water we have them as they are in their source before they became in forms of the air, of these four forms. Well, we're going to clarify it in a minute. So the four elements listed by Maimonides are foundational in the sense that everything in this world that exists is comprised of them. And everything in the world has all of the four elements. Now, some things have more than others. So you have, if you have liquid, for example, yeah? Liquid has the element of all the four elements. But in liquid itself, you have two types of different types of liquids. For example, if you take, for example, the water and blood. Water has all four elements, and blood also has four elements. But obviously, blood has more of a drier element. So it has more of the element of earth in it. And the same thing with every creature in the world. It's just a combination of these four elements, and depending on what level each element has in the creature. And this Maimonides says there is a fifth, a generic element that encompasses all four elements. Unlike the four elements that emerge from it, the fifth element has no physical definition. So the four elements have already form of physical form, not in the physical world. They don't have the matter, but they have the form. So basically what comes out, the fifth element is intangible and serves as the source from which the other four elements originate. And basically what comes out is we have these three steps, and that's important to understand the what's coming now in the class, is that we have these three steps. Everything in the world. You have step number one, you have the generic form that is inside their source. Before it came out to the form, that's generic form, the source, they call it the potential. From it comes out these four elements. That's number one. Step number two, you have defined state, form without matter. This is the more defined state in which they become characteristic, that they are form without matter, these four elements. And finally, you have the complete form. When they are married to matter, when the form is married to matter, they become an element of physical objects. Okay? Okay. So, now that we understand this concept of the four elements and the fifth element, we're going to go further back to the discussion with the chametz. In chametz, we have three prohibitions. What are the prohibitions of not eating chametz? You have not eating, not just chametz. You have not eating anything unkosher. Then you have things that you're not only not allowed to eat, but you can also not benefit from something which is forbidden. For example, if you have a piece of meat which is not kosher, you're not allowed to eat it. But are you allowed to sell it if you have it? Yes. If you happen to have it, you're allowed to sell it to someone, you benefit from it. Certain things you're not allowed to sell either. For example, a mixture of meat and milk, the Torah says, it is also not only is it not allowed to eat meat and milk together, But if you possess something which is a mixture of meat and milk, it was cooked together, you cannot even sell it. You cannot benefit from it. But then number three is things that not only you cannot benefit, but also you cannot possess it. And that is very rare. The chametz in Passover is one of the examples. Chametz on Passover, what do we do with the chametz? We have to sell it. We have to get rid of it before Passover. Either you sell it to a guy, so you don't possess it. But if you didn't sell it to a guy, you have to burn it. That's why before Passover, the day before Passover, you always have these bonfires all of the around the Jewish communities where they burn all the chametz. If it's a liquid like vodka that is from grain based on grain, you have to spill it out. You have to spill it in the toilet. You cannot benefit from it, and you cannot possess it again unless you sell it. Now, to understand the reasons why are these three types of prohibitions, why some things are you cannot benefit, some things you just cannot eat it, and some things you cannot even possess it. So take, for example, when you go to a machine breaks down, you go to a mechanic, and you have to fix the car. You have to fix a machine with any machine. Okay. Sometimes you look at the machine, you'll see everything is fine, you just have to fine tune it and it works. Everything is good. Then sometimes there's a problem that he looks in the machine and everything is everything is not good. You see, you have to realize that fine tuning is not enough. You have to take it apart, and you find that some components are broken. You have to fix and change the components. But then sometimes there is some flaw in a machine that it's not that a component is broken and not that it's not tuned. It is sometimes a flaw in the design, in the very core design, that the engineer who designed this machine made a mistake, and that's why it's not working. So this is just an example to use to give us understanding what we're going to say now. You see, what is the idea of food that is forbidden, things that are forbidden, things that we cannot own, things that we cannot eat, things that we cannot benefit? So in the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe explains that everything in this world comes from Hashem. However, there is the forces of Kedusha, the holiness, and there is the forces of Klipa, the unholy forces. Things that are unholy are forbidden. We cannot elevate the energy that is in the forbidden items. This is such an energy that in Hebrew it is called asur. What is asur? Asur means forbidden. Asur also has another meaning. Asur also means it's tied down. It's tied down, and it means that one cannot elevate it to holiness. Now here the question is, how deep is the forbidden energy in the item? There are some things that for whatever reason, the way God created them, some things are considered unholy only on the surface. The machinery is not holy. And that's why you cannot consume it, you cannot eat it. There are some things that unholiness penetrates not only on the surface, the matter of the thing, but also in the form, meaning in the four elements, where they come from. they are also contaminated with the unholiness. Things like that are forbidden not only to eat, not only to consume, but also you cannot benefit from it because they're really unholy in their core. Let's see what the Alter Rebbe says this in the Tanya. Says the Alter Rebbe here, forbidden foods are called asur, tied down. Again, asur means forbidden, but also means tied down, like we say matir asurim, the one who unties the tide. If someone eats something forbidden, erroneously, for the sake of heaven, meaning intending to use its nourishment to study Torah or to pray, the nourishment does not attach to the words of Torah and prayer. It cannot become holy. It is tied down to the unholiness. That's the idea why you cannot eat those things. Because it's tied down. Because when you eat something, you use the energy. You do it for a mitzvah, what happens? So the energy that is in the food is being elevated and connected to holiness. But things which are totally unholy, forbidden, they are tied down, and no matter how much what you do with the energy, you don't have the ability to elevate it. As the Rebbe says, when we eat something, we benefit from its finished form, the edible form. We don't interact with the element that form the food. When you eat something, what do you enjoy? What do you benefit? The taste, whatever element, whatever form it has. But it's not the form of the food itself. When you take some food, when you look at a piece of a hamburger, for the person who eats the hamburger, what does the hamburger give him? It gives him a nice taste, maybe a good aroma, a good smell, a good feeling. But for the restaurant owner, what does he have with the hamburger? What is the hamburger for him? He's able to benefit from it. He's able to look at the way he serves it, the way he gives it, the way he presents it. And when he takes it and sells it, he's connecting to the other elements of the hamburger. When we derive, continues the Rebbe, when we derive benefit from something, we interact with the element that form it. The elements that form it. So we don't interact only with step number 3, as you remember before. We don't interact only with the element, the way it already can marry to the matter, the form married to the matter. But we interact with the elements itself that form it. And this is why, continues the Rebbe, foods that are forbidden to eat are tied down to unholiness. However, it's crucial to recognize that this unholiness pertains only to the outer surface or the finished form of the food, which renders it unsuitable for consumption. The individual elements that constitute the food item, those associated with potential benefit, they are not inherently unholy. Consequently, we may derive benefit from these elements. So again, the unholiness only affect the surface of the items. And that is why it's the essence of the items, the element that make the items, they're not contaminated by the unholiness, that's why you're allowed to benefit. Take, for example, a horse. Horse meat, not that anybody's going to eat horse meat, maybe some people do, but it said they're certainly not kosher. Now, the question is, does it mean that a horse does not have any potential energy that is positive? Absolutely yes, it does have. That's why you're allowed to ride a horse. You're allowed to ride a horse. You cannot eat a horse. You cannot eat the meat, horse meat. You're allowed to ride a horse. And when you ride the horse to go to do a mitzvah, what you do is you elevate the horse. That energy that is in the horse that can be elevated, you connect that energy to godliness, to holiness. Now this, until now, we only spoke about the items that are affected with the unholiness in the two levels. However, then there is a different level, a third level, where the unholiness affects not only in the four elements of the items, but the unholiness is deeply rooted, even in the very core, what we called before, the potential, the intangible source of the four elements, the fifth element. There is that's the root of everything. If in such a case, the prohibition is not only to eat, not only not to benefit, but also not to possess. You have to get rid of it completely, because the very essence of it, the very core of it is contaminated. And that's the idea with chametz and Passover. The idea which represents, as we'll soon see, it reflects what we go out of Egypt, that the unholiness was touched, was affected so deeply. He's not talking about this concept in this talk, but also the idea of chametz is connected with arrogance, feelings of self. This is something that has to be completely eradicated on Passover. And that is why on chametz, the prohibition is completely not to possess it. That's the Rebbe continues here. It says, chametz may not be found in our possession, even if we make absolutely no use of it and derive no benefit from it. This means that the entire object, even the very core that's divested of all form, is tied down to unholiness. This is why ownership of its very existence is forbidden. Okay, that's the answer. So the reason why ownership of chametz is prohibited is because chametz at its core is unholy and cannot be elevated. You cannot elevate this energy. Now here comes an interesting fact that we read in the Haggadah. We said before, we're going to talk about what we read in the Parsha about the plagues. The plagues that the Egyptians were plagued. How many plagues did we have? We had 10 plagues in Egypt. But if we read in the Haggadah, what we read in Passover night, we find some interesting discussions that sometimes we don't pay attention to it. But there is a discussion, a debate between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. So first of all, we have to know that they had 10 plagues in Egypt. the Egyptians were also plagued by the sea. And the plagues by the sea was 5 times as many plagues as they had in Egypt. 5 times is because the Torah says that in Egypt, it says, Etzba Elokim, the plagues in Egypt was with Hashem's finger. And by the water, it says Hashem plagued them with his hand. How many fingers do you have in a hand? They have 5. So therefore they say by the water they were plagued 5 times as what they were plagued in Egypt. Now the debate between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. It says Rabbi Eliezer says that every plague they had in Egypt was composed of 4 plagues. Every plague was double 4. That means in Egypt they had 10, so they had 40. Rabbi Akiva says that every plague was double 5, multiplied by 5. So in Egypt they had 50, and by the water they had 250. Let's see it inside what we read in the Haggadah. Maybe next Pesach, I know it's a while from here, still time, but maybe you'll pay more attention to it when you read it next Passover. So it says like this. Rabbi Eliezer said, how do we know that each plague that God brought upon the Egyptians in Egypt consisted of 4 plagues? The passage states, he sent against them his fierce anger. This is a verse in the Tehillim. He sent against them his fierce anger, fury, and indignation, and trouble, and the discharge of messengers of evil. And he explains, what is fury is 1, indignation makes 2, trouble makes 3, discharge of messengers of anger makes 4. Thus, you know that in Egypt they were struck by 40 plagues, and at the sea they were struck by 200 plagues. That's what Rabbi Eliezer says. Rabbi Akiva said, how do we know that each plague that God brought upon the Egyptians in Egypt consisted of 5 plagues? He says the passage states, he uses the same passage. But if you notice, he already counts the first part of the passage as a plague for itself. And he says as follows, he sent against them his fierce anger and fury and indignation and trouble and the discharge of messengers of evil. His fierce anger is 1, fury makes 2, indignation makes 3, trouble makes 4, discharge of messengers of evil makes 5. Thus, you know that in Egypt they were struck by 50 plagues, and at the sea they were struck by 250 plagues. Okay. Now, based on what we just explained, the concept of the 4 elements and the 5th element, we can understand the discussion, the debate between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer. What does Rabbi Eliezer say? He says that each plague was double 4. Why? He says because the plague was affecting not only for example, the plague of blood. It's not just the blood itself. The elements that make up the blood also were plagued. Why? Because the Egyptian, they contaminated with impurity even the elements to the core. That's why he says each plague was made out of 4. And Rabbi Akiva says that it was made out of 5. Why? Because Rabbi Akiva also, he holds that the contamination went so deep, not only to the 4 elements, but also to the 5th element. The source of all the 4 elements. That is the difference. That is the difference between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. Right? So Rabbi Eliezer, again, he said that each plague in Egypt was 10 times 4, it's 40. And on the ocean was 40 times 5, which is 20. And Rabbi Akiva says each plague was 10 times 5, and the ocean was 50 times 5. That's what it says. Rabbi Eliezer, who maintains that each plague consisted 4 plagues, is of the opinion that the plagues infiltrated not just the complete form, but also its 4 constituent elements. Rabbi Akiva, who maintains that each plague consists of 5 plagues, is of the opinion that each plague attacked not only the elements, but also the generic state from which they emerged. Okay? So now this answers the question. The question is, how deeply did the sins of the Egyptians impact their possessions? Did their sins contaminate only their base elements or even infiltrated their original generic state? And here's the answer. The purpose of the plagues was not just to punish, but also to cleanse. Therefore, the plagues had to drill down to each layer that was contaminated by sin. So Rabbi Eliezer argues that the impurity only reached the constituent elements. Rabbi Akiva says that it reached down to the generic state of the elements. Okay? Now, taking it to the next step. Until now, we spoke about in the negative. We spoke about the elements, the different elements that exist in the unholiness. But the same thing also exists in the holiness when it comes to serve Hashem. When it comes to serve Hashem, how our connection with God, how deep is it? How deep does it go? Because we also have the different elements in us. We have the thought, we have the speech, we have the action. And we have the 4th element. The 4th element is the desire. So when we serve Hashem, we can serve God by connecting to God, by affecting and creating that relationship between the 3 elements. We do the right thing, we think the right thing, we speak the right thing. But we can do it also in a deeper connection using all 4 elements, which is doing things with a desire, with a feeling, with passion. That's the insight. The Alter Rebbe says in the TORAH, there are 4 dimensions in the Jewish soul. They are thought, speech, and action. The 4th is the supernal will of God that transcends thought, speech, and action. This is drawn down and exposed in this world by performing a mitzvah. So when you do a mitzvah, you can do it with thought, speech, and action. But when you do it with desire, it changes the whole thing. You add the desire to it, it changes everything. So the relationship that we have, using, again, the analogy of the restaurant. Imagine you were at a restaurant where the food was perfect, but the atmosphere was not so perfect, or not so good. Would you enjoy the experience? Here's an article about food service and hospitality. What is most, so here it's an opinion of this writer. What is important in a restaurant, food, service, or atmosphere? This is a loaded question. While I believe that all three, and again, food, service, or atmosphere. So it says, while I believe that all three need to be executed to the highest standard, whether in quick service restaurant, casual, or fine dining operation, I also believe that service and atmosphere are the two most important ingredients in making a restaurant successful. And he writes, I apologize in advance to all the chefs who are going to complain about this comment. He says, this is not to say that the food quality and consistency are not also important. They are, but they are really secondary. The reality is that the most part, people go out to either fill up, spend time with friends, or dine out. It is only in 2% of restaurants that people go to dine out, to experience the chef's creation, in which food would in my world need to be as good as service. But in the end, service is what the hospitality business is all about. Great food does not make up for mediocre service. However, great service can offset mediocre food. In fact, it does almost every quick service, family and casual chain out there. Those restaurants make up the vast majority of our industry and are the most popular with customers as well. Focus first on great service. Then make sure the atmosphere reflects the environment you want your customer to enjoy. And then put out the best food that you can. So yes, it's important to have everything. It's important to have the service. So the great service, great food. When you're talking about the service of Hashem, what are we talking about? We're talking about there's a mitzvah to perform, okay? There's a mitzvah to perform. You can do the mitzvah, and you do it then, you do it because, yeah, you have to do it, so you do it. Imagine you go to a baseball game, or a football game, whatever is your favorite. And you realize then in the middle of the game, you realize, oh, I didn't pray today. I didn't put in tefillin. So let's say you have your tefillin with you, and you say, you know what? I'm going to take a half hour. I'm going to go to the side, find myself a corner, put on the tefillin, I'm going to pray to Hashem. So you're doing the right thing. You're taking your tefillin and you're praying. The question is, when you're praying, the 30 minutes or whatever you take off, what is your feeling when you do this? Is it something you're doing? I have to do it quickly. I want to get back to my game. And you do it reluctantly. I have no choice. I have to do it. I have to pray. So I need to put in tefillin. Or is it something that you do with excitement? And you're happy. And you're saying, wow, I now forget about the game. I'm now focusing on my davening, connecting to Hashem. I'm connecting to Hashem. This is where the difference between giving just the thoughts and speech and action, or giving also the desire. Giving also the fourth element of you to Hashem. I said there was once a story with back in the 20s and the Great Depression, when it was very difficult to hold a job. Jewish people kept Shabbos, and there was this Jew that every week he was fired from his job every week again, but he kept strong. He didn't want to lose that Shabbos. He wanted to keep Shabbos, but he came home every Friday depressed and bitter and says, why do I have to suffer so much? It's hard to be a Jew, to doing this. Time went by, his children didn't follow his ways. And they went off the way. They didn't keep Shabbos. And he went to one of the rabbis and he asked him, he doesn't understand. I gave my life and I sacrificed my life to keep Shabbos. How come my children left everything? They didn't keep Shabbos. So the rabbi empathized with him. And he said, I have to ask you the question. When you came home every Friday, and you had to work, you had to give up the work because of Shabbos, what was your reaction? How was your conduct? What did you say? Were you happy? Were you excited? Or were you bitter about it? And he said the truth. And he said, yes, honestly, I was I was not happy. So what do you expect? Your children see you suffering. What do they want to suffer like you? When you're doing something with happiness, when you're doing something with great happiness, with joy, understanding you're serving Hashem, Hashem gives you opportunity to connect with Him. You don't want just to connect in with the exterior parts of you. You want to give the inner part. This is the fourth element. Serving God with enthusiasm and desire makes our service complete. Maimonides says, it is a great service when we rejoice in the fulfillment of God's commandment. We do it with joy and demonstrate our love for He who commands them. And as the Rebbe of Karlin once said, he says, sadness is not a sin. However, the worst sin can't turn off our hearts as much as sadness. A Jew who fails to rejoice over the privilege of being a Jew is ungrateful to God. Understand the privilege that we have. So this is the fourth element. Now the question is, what is the fifth element? So we serve Hashem with our thoughts, with our speech, with our action. What is the fifth element? How do we serve Hashem with the fifth element? What is the fifth element? The fifth element is completely giving of itself over that Hashem is number one in everything. So if you're in that football game and not just about praying, but you get a phone call, someone needs your help back at home. There's an old lady that needs some help or whatever. And you say to yourself, I'm leaving the game and I'm going to help that lady. That's already a whole new level. That's not just giving, serving Hashem, whatever you need to do, and you do it with happiness, you do it with joy. But when in your mind, Hashem is number one. There's nothing else. You give over to Hashem everything. Giving yourself, putting God first, that is the fifth element. That is something which is beyond even desire. It is your essence, the core of you talks. So there's an interesting example, again, using the metaphor of the restaurant service is also an interesting metaphor. The fifth element of human experience, our very core. So here comes about another metaphor from the restaurant business. It says humans want to feel valued. They want to feel like everything they say is heard and understood. And you are the trusted supplier to make that happen. Even if their mind is elsewhere, knowing that yours is on them will cement your company and its carrying ethos in their memory. Adnan Ali, a former restaurant owner, remembers a time When a regular customer dined without his partner, knowing that he normally comes with her, we asked to see if she was okay. And he let us know that she had the flu. Before the customer left, we packed up some freshly made soup and some other menu items for him to take home for her on the house. The team's gesture was super appreciated, resulting in lots of positive feedback. So here it is. Putting God above all else means you feel Him in your deepest sense of self, and He's present in your core. So that's the fifth element. Obviously, this is something that doesn't come every day, but it is the deep understanding that my connection with God goes beyond everything. And the relationship goes both ways. There's a shliach in Kathmandu, Nepal. His name is Rabbi Cheskel Lifshitz, his wife Chani. And they're doing amazing work, great work. Mostly of Israeli travelers who come there, backpackers, and they come. And many of them have no background in Judaism, and they're not religious, and they go to have some fun, to explore. And one day it was the middle of a winter there, and a couple came. She was Limor, and they looked very disturbed, not happy. And they had a conversation with them, and apparently what happened, they were married for some years, 10 years, and they couldn't have any children. And they went to different doctors and different things. They tried here, tried many things, and nothing helped. And this he had its toll on the relationship. And they were about to part ways, but they decided, before they part ways, they're going to go on this journey, on this trip to Nepal, to Kathmandu, or whatever. So Rebbetzin Chani tells her, why don't you try to go to the mikveh? Go to the mikveh. The mikveh, she didn't hear, maybe she heard about it, but she didn't believe in these things. And Rabbi Tzanchani convinced her, told her, listen, yes, you got to do it. But wait a second, do we have a mikveh here? No, we don't have a mikveh. What do you use? We use the river. We go to the river. Now, mind you, it was the middle of the winter. In the middle of the winter, you have to use the river. And it took a long time. He was against it. She was against it. But Rebbetzin told her about this special thing, about the special blessings, special connection, special mitzvah you're doing when you immerse in the mikveh. And she agreed. She goes down. Rebbetzin Chani goes down with Limor down to the river at night. And guess what? The river is ice. She goes and she breaks the ice. And she immerses in the mikveh. She says she comes out from the mikveh with such a feeling. She looks at the stars as if the stars came down to greet her. And they finished their journey, the trip, and they didn't hear from her. And 10 months later, Limor calls Rabbi Tzanchani with an emotional call. Said, I just gave birth to my baby girl. So connecting to Hashem in the deepest sense, doing something so crazy, breaking the ice and going to the mikveh, doing this mitzvah. What did you do? You just unleashed, you just opened up your deepest self. You connected with Hashem with the fifth element, connecting to Hashem in the deepest element, going beyond logic, doing the thing because you're connecting to Hashem. And that in turn brought that great blessing, because that's how it works. Hashem is infinite, unlimited, and his blessings are unlimited. Putting God above all else means you feel him in your deepest sense of self, and he's present in your core. So, the key points, what we learned tonight. Everything that exists is comprised of four elements: heat, cold, dryness, and moisture. There's a fifth element, an intangible sphere in which the four elements exist in a generic state. Point number 2, we are forbidden to eat things that are unholy in their fully formed state. We are forbidden to benefit from things in which the unholiness has drilled down to the constituent elements, to the four elements. We are forbidden even to possess things that have become unholy at their core. And point number 3, humans also have four elements. They are action, speech, thought, and desire. Then there is a fifth element, our very core. And point number 4, to have a connection with God, we must serve him with all four elements, not just our actions and words, but also our minds and hearts. And finally, point number 5, however, to forge a complete connection, we must give him our very core. This means that nothing is indispensable when it comes to God. We are ready to do anything or give up anything to please him, to connect to him. And this is it for tonight's share. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. I have to go.
All right. All the best, Jeff.
Thank you, Rabbi Cohen.